Okay, so if we're ready to go, good morning everyone and welcome to the local review body. Obviously there's words that I have to read out, so welcome Councillor MacDonald and Councillor Cameron, good to see you all. So welcome those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. Can all attendees switch off their camera and mute their microphone when not speaking? The camera and microphone should only be switched on when you are invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained in the guidance issued to you. I will now ask the clerk to advise the members participating today and for all members to confirm their attendance once their names have been announced by the clerk, so that this is clear in the recording of the meeting and also be recorded by the clerk for the minute. As local review bodies contain quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room or meeting during consideration of any of the applications. This meeting has been convened in response to two requests for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the Council's scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mrs. McBain, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in the conduct of these reviews. Mrs. McBain.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just do a quick roll call for the recording. So if members could just indicate that they're present. So Councillor Stewart.
I'm present.
Councillor Cameron.
Present.
And Councillor MacDonald.
Present.
Okay, thank you. I'll just read out the statement now. So members have their procedure note, which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replace that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. I'll hand back to you, Convener.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. McBain. So if we're all content with what the clerk has said, I would be turning to the consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application of the detailed planning permission for the erection of dog boarding kennels and office space with associated solar panels, fencing, car parking and other associated works at Old Town Farm, Station Road, Aberdeen, 191717. We will now hear the planning advisor in attendance, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. As fellow councillors know, I would point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with necessary professional planning guidance, because he's not been involved in either in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will not, however, be able to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. I would now turn to Mr. Evans to describe the application of this review. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. If members could bear with me just a moment, I'll get my presentation up on screen whilst I'm talking. There we are. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So yes, thank you, Chair. As you said, before us today we have an application for a local review against an application refused under delegated powers for detailed planning permission for the erection of dog boarding, kennels and office space with associated solar panels, fencing, car parking and other associated works at Old Town Farm, Station Road South, Peter Cooter. The review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. In the notice of review, the applicant has indicated that no new matters have been raised. However, I have noticed that an older set of drawings and plans has been appended to the review submissions, and this might well have been done inadvertently. However, at this point, I just advise that the role of the local review body, as the committee clerk mentioned already, is to review the earlier decision on the basis of the same proposal that was before the appointed officer. So we're looking at the same thing that that officers were looking at previously. So moving on, the applicants have requested that further procedure be undertaken by the local review body, in this case by way of a site inspection, in order to disprove the appointed officer's assertion that the proposal would not be of an appropriate scale and form to suit its surroundings. So I'll give you a brief background to the case, and then we can come back for members to make a judgment on whether you think a site inspection would be required. So turning to a description of the site, the application site forms part of the existing Old Town Farm holdings and is located approximately 1 mile south of Peter Cooter. The wider Old Town Farm holdings include a 2-storey granite farmhouse, a pair of semi-detached 1.5-storey dwellings, a converted bothy and various agricultural buildings, with agricultural land on all sides. The current application site sits immediately to the north of this cluster of buildings, to the western side of the access road cum driveway. On this location plan here, members will note that the application site's outlined in red, with the wider area of land under the applicant's control outlined in blue, best shown on the right-hand image there. So the site in the wider farm sits within an area zoned as Greenbelt in the Aberdeen Local Development Plan and is accessed via a narrow single-track road. Peter Cooter Golf Club runs to the east of the farm, which I think you can see better in the aerial view, although it's separated by fields, with the clubhouse and parking area located to the northeast of the farmsteading. So this is the clubhouse just on that image, if you can see my cursor there, with the car parking out in front. In terms of planning history, if I flip forward, sorry, I'll need to flick forwards and back a little bit. Oh no, sorry, I thought I had a slide for the planning history of the site. The officer's report, which is included in the agenda pack, details an extensive planning history to the wider Old Town Farm site. That includes conversion of agricultural for new dwellings and the construction of a new dwelling, a new standalone dwelling. Those applications being from 2002 to 2004. In more recent years, planning permission in principle was refused in 2015 for the erection of a dwelling house on a portion of the current application site, with that refusal later being upheld by the local review body. In 2016, a planning permission in principle application was again refused for the erection of farm workers accommodation, with that decision again being upheld by the local review body in September of 2016. Turning to the proposal, or this is the site as existing, sorry. So essentially it's just an enclosed field with post and wire fence, and you'll see there's an existing pump house, and these circles just some existing trees around the edge of the paddock. Turning to the proposal, detailed planning permission is sought for the erection of a 1.5-storey building with dormer windows and an elongated 35-metre long rear wing for use as dog boarding kennels with associated office space. The proposed building would be finished in grey render and natural slate and would accommodate office space, staff facilities and areas for storage and animal care within the 1.5-storey part of the building at the front, with the single-storey rear wing accommodating 28 pens and 2 indoor exercise areas. I think you see that better from the floor plan here. So that's the sort of rear wing that protrudes out from the back, and you'll see the arrangement of pens down the central portion of the site with the 2 dedicated indoor exercise areas there. The total floor space contained within the building is approximately 381 square metres, 203 square metres of which is in that central rear wing. The building would be positioned centrally within the application site, with the 1.5-storey building to the fore facing southwest towards the main farmhouse and looking onto a landscaped area at its frontage, with an area of hard standing beyond that. That's just outlined in this dashed red line here, which is referred to on plans as existing car parking for up to 18 vehicles. 5 new dedicated car parking spaces are shown on the eastern boundary, just down here, whilst a larger area of artificial grass extending to more than 600 square metres is shown on all sides of the rear wing. So if you can just see, there's a slight distinction in the shades of green there. The bit at the front is just landscaping and not normal grass. Everything to the rear of the front wall of the building is artificial grass or something akin to AstroTurf. The proposals had initially shown each outdoor pen having a dedicated outdoor, Proposals had initially shown each indoor pen having a dedicated outdoor pen area. So in terms of the layout, there was a central corridor and then the pens could be opened into a sort of a run outdoors. And the artificial grass area was indicated as an outdoor exercise area. However, subsequent revisions to the proposal removed outdoor pens and all reference to outdoor exercise of animals within the site. Members will note that among the application-related documents online, the applicants also submitted financial information relating to the operation of Old Town Farm for 2019, with a covering letter indicating that the proposed boarding kennel was identified as an additional revenue stream to diversify the business and keep the farm operational. Just flicking through the elevations here. So this is the side elevation. So again, you can see the 1.5-storey portion of the building at the front, and then this is the sort of staggered or tiered rear wing that protrudes out from the back and doesn't have windows or on any side, given the nature of the use. And again, just a note of the finishes on the bottom of the drawing there. So dry dash render, natural slate to the roof, and doors and windows in timber with rainwater goods and PVC. That's the front elevation to the left, and then this is the rear elevation on the right hand side. So again, you can see that sort of staggered or tiered effect on the rear wing, and that's just a wider site plan that indicates the sort of overspill or existing car parking there. So we've got some site photos just to help you get your bearings. So in the bottom right of the screen, you'll see this just gives you an indication of where those photos have approximately been taken from. So there's a fork in the driveway, and you'll see that the application site's just on the right hand side. So this is the application site that we're looking into just on the right of the image there. As mentioned before, enclosed by a post and wire fence with some trees arranged along the edge of the boundary. Just a closer shot of that pump house that's existing within the site. And this is looking back into the site this being the sort of boundary of the site. So this is the existing area of car parking that was referred to and shown dashed red on the plan. Taken from the same parking area, just looking across to the other side of the driveway, these are the existing agricultural buildings, unaffected by the proposal. And then looking the opposite direction, just towards the farmhouse and across the area of parking. And in that case, just looking back down the slope towards the driveway access. Same, but from a slightly further back view. And this again is just looking with the application site on the left-hand side, looking up in this direction towards a neighbouring stable facility. These are, I understand, former outbuildings that were converted into dwelling houses. So that gives you an indication of the relationship between the use and the closest residential properties in terms of the noise impact that we'll come back to later. So turning to the pointed for refusal. Again, there's a copy of the decision notice included within the agenda pack, but the reasons are stated here in full. So firstly, the proposal would result in development within an area of agricultural land which forms part of a wider farming operation and would be for a use which is deemed to be neither essential for nor associated with any existing activity. The proposed development would therefore be contrary to the expectations of Scottish planning policy and would clearly fail to comply with the requirements of policy any 2 relating to Greenbelt in the Aberdeen Local Development Plan. Second stated reason, the proposed development does not reflect the existing development pattern, nor is it of a form scale massing, or have the design characteristics appropriate for a rural setting, and therefore does not address the expectations of policy D1, quality placemaking by design. Whilst deemed to be partially compliant with the requirements of policy T2 relating to transport impact, the proposed development was seen to fail to demonstrate suitable compliance with the requirements of policy T3 relating to sustainable and active travel, and policy NE6, flooding, drainage and water quality. Mitigation measures which were identified as being necessary to address noise issues relating to the proposed development and to protect existing residential amenity cannot be reasonably secured. Therefore, the proposal also fails to comply with the requirements of policy T5, noise, of the local development plan. And lastly, the proposal, if approved, would set an undesirable precedent for applications of a similar nature, which would result in the proliferation of sporadic development, which in turn would lead to the erosion of the character of the Greenbelt, adversely affecting the landscape setting of the city. Turning then to the applicant's case, as set out in the notice of review and an accompanying statement. This refers directly to the reasons for refusal, and the main points, just summarised, are put forward as follows. Notes that the site was most recently used as a paddock, but is now surplus to the daily workings of the farm. The applicants feel that inadequate opportunity was given to them to address the reasons for refusal prior to the appointed officer's decision being made. Contend that the final response from the Community Council was submitted out with the consultation period. Highlight a marked downturn in the farm's profitability in recent years, with this proposal offering a means of supplementary income, which they believe is consistent with Scottish planning policy. Contends that the design and materials are in keeping with the surroundings, and states that policy T3, sustainable and active travel, is not wholly relevant due to the nature of the business. I think in that case referring to the fact that dogs would typically be brought to the site by their owners in a car. So it's perhaps not so reasonable to expect people to be taking the bus or walking. In terms of the water supply, the applicants noted that no further evidence was requested by the Planning Authority prior to making its decision. And the applicants consider that the Planning Authority has accepted the findings of the local community council over its own environmental health team as regards noise impacts and mitigation. Highlights also that mitigation measures have been included to address noise impact affecting occupants at Old Town Farm, despite them operating the business and accepting the related noise. Suggests that no precedent would be set as all applications are considered on their merits, and points to a nearby development of stables completed recently as demonstrating the points to the nearby development of stables recently as demonstrating that development of this nature is acceptable in this context. In terms of consultations, full copies of these are included in the agenda at pages 79 to 108. These include responses from the Council's Environmental Health Team, Council's Roads Development Management Team and local Cooter Community Council. The Council's Environmental Health colleagues made comments on noise, private water supply and licensing. In relation to noise, there was no objection from Environmental Health, provided that all of the identified mitigation measures in the noise impact assessment were applied and maintained. That would include additional sound insulation in the construction of the building, self-closing solid doors and acoustic wall ventilators instead of opening windows. Also included time restrictions on the cleaning of the kennels, the transportation of animals for exercise, a limitation on the number of animals being groomed at any one time, and exercise and a prohibition on exercise of animals within the site boundaries. The appointed officer's report, however, concluded that having had regard for a Scottish Government reporter's comments in relation to a planning appeal at Tillyoch in Peter Cooter relating to a dog kennels, that it would not be enforceable to secure all of these things via planning conditions. It recognised, the appointed officer's report recognised that things such as additional insulation or self-closing doors in the construction, the physical construction of the building, would be something that could be secured, but in terms of the ongoing managerial controls and limitation on number of animals and the times at which pens could be cleaned and things, that simply wouldn't be practicable from an enforcement point of view. In terms of the water supply to serve the development, Environmental Health colleagues required that the applicants demonstrate that a mains water supply is not possible. This hadn't been demonstrated. If a private water supply was to be pursued against Environmental Health's recommendation, then a comprehensive assessment of the quality of the water supply was required to be completed by a competent person. Some submissions were made by the applicant, but Environmental Health colleagues remained of the view that these did not fulfil their requirements in terms of demonstrating the adequacy of the water supply. And the officer's report therefore concluded that the requirements of policy NE6 had not been satisfied. In terms of licensing, Environmental Health colleagues pointed out that a separate licensing requirements do exist in relation to dog kennels. And so the applicant would be obliged to seek those licenses separate from the planning process. The Council's Roads Development Management Team stated no objection to the proposal. They considered that adequate parking levels were provided in relation to the visitor and customer parking turnover anticipated from the use. And turning next to the local community council, Cooter Community Council maintained its objection to the proposal, raising concerns about the noise impact assessment having been undertaken only considering noise originating from within the building, and in their view that failed to take account for noise coming from dogs when they were out in the open, either on arrival or when being exercised at the building. Concern about noise from within the building when doors would be wedged open to provide cooling would also undermine noise insulation. And the Community Council queried the applicant's assertion that no dogs would be exercised on the site, and refers to an earlier Scottish Government reporter's appeal decision where the appointed reporter concluded that a planning condition prohibiting exercise of dogs on site at a kennels would not be enforceable. Ultimately considered that the applicant had failed to demonstrate that the noise impacts would not be an issue, and therefore the proposal would be contrary to policy T5 of local development plan relating to noise. Sorry, just on the wrong page there. In terms of representations, there was just one single representation received from members of the public. This is included again in the agenda pack, but raised concerns in relation to noise impact, questioned the requirement for another kennel, noting that there are 2 local dog kennel facilities, and lastly pointed to the proposed design and layout, expressing the view that the design and layout of the scheme did not take into account a document entitled Model Licence Conditions and Guidance for Dog Boarding Establishments, which is an environmental health publication, and provides specific recommendations for the design of new build kennel facilities. So the implication there is that by omitting outdoor runs or exercise areas at the kennels to address noise concerns at this planning stage, the applicants may subsequently be unable to meet licensing requirements that are incumbent upon kennel developments. Ultimately, that is a separate regulatory process, but it's just something to perhaps be mindful of. In terms of additional submissions at the review stage, these are at pages 109 to 112. So on submission of this review and notification of interested parties, the Cooter Community Council reiterated its objection and drew attention again to the noise impact assessment's failure to consider noise from dogs out in the open, and again highlighted the Scottish Government reporter's conclusions at that other site at Tilioch in relation to dog kennels. The applicant's appointed agent provided a subsequent response to those comments, refuting the suggestion that noise remains an issue, and pointed to the appointment of a qualified acoustic consultant, and attaching correspondence confirming the consultant's view that the transfer of animals to and from the building at drop-off or pick-up time and to vans for contracted dog walking services off-site would be of a short duration and at reasonable, business times, and therefore would be negligible in terms of noise disturbance or nuisance in the consultant's view. In terms of further procedure there, Councillor Stewart, the applicant, as I mentioned, has expressed a view that the review process should include a site inspection to allow members to appreciate the relationship between the proposed building and its surrounding context. So at that point, I would just hand back over to you for members to consider whether they think that's necessary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans. Members, so I'm just going to continue doing from what I'm supposed to do. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated the local review body should conduct a site visit prior to determination of the review. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that further written information be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. I'm just reading as it comes to me. So it's Councillor Cameron. Could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minute the reason why. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I don't require a site visit. I'm very acquainted with this area. It's several years now, but I was a member of Cooter Golf Club for 10 years. I probably haven't played golf for almost the same length of time. But the area hasn't changed. I do know the area quite well, and I think there's enough information in the papers we've been provided with that I don't need a site visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacDonald, could you please state if you have sufficient information to take a decision, and if you do not feel any further procedures are required, please state for the minute the reasons why.
Thank you very much, convener. I have had a good look at everything that's in front of me, and I too don't feel that I need to go to visit that site. I lived in Cooter and know the area and feel I can make a decision from what I know at the moment of that area and the information in front of me. So I don't require a site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. So it's also, as convener, I have to make a decision here, as it says on the script I have to read from. So I too feel that I have sufficient information in front of me to make a determination and don't require a site visit. So now that we're all in agreement, or the three councillors are in agreement of that, we'll now hear from Mr. Evans on the relevant policies considerations for the review. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just get this screen back up. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that okay. So yes, thank you, Convener. Moving on to the policy side of things. First and foremost, we'll consider the Aberdeen Local Development Plan. As I mentioned before, the application site is within an area zoned as Greenbelt, where policy NE2 will apply. This sets out that no development will be permitted in the Greenbelt for purposes other than those essential for agriculture, woodland and forestry, recreational uses compatible with an agricultural or natural setting, mineral extraction or quarry restoration, or lastly, landscape renewal. So really members should be asking themselves whether they feel that the proposed boarding kennels is essential for any of these purposes first and foremost. Then moving on, policy NE2 follows that up with a number of specific exceptions. Sorry, let's get forward too far there. There we go. So those include proposals for development within existing activities in the Greenbelt. So that's where you have, for example, an existing business that might look to expand within its boundary, sort of thing. Essential infrastructure, the conversion of buildings of architectural historic interest. In this case, as you've heard, this is a new build development. It's not involving conversion of any existing farm buildings. And lastly, replacement houses on a one-for-one basis. Again, not relevant in this case. We're not talking about a domestic development. Those two sets of criteria relate to establishing the principle of development in the Greenbelt. If the principle in members' minds has been established, then policy NE2 also requires that development within the Greenbelt be of the highest quality in terms of siting, scale, design and materials. And the appointed officer's report concluded that the proposed development would not be essential for any of the specified uses, nor would it fall within any of the exceptions listed in policy NE2, but it's for members to come to their own view on those questions. Turning next to policy D1, this relates to design quality and requires development to be of a high standard of design, which demonstrates an understanding of its context and links back to the 6 qualities essential to good placemaking. That development be distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to move around and access, adaptable and resource efficient. Again, the officer's report contended that the proposed building was not of a style consistent with its rural setting, and that its front section resembled somewhat a suburban house, with the elongated, stepped and windowless rear wing also not of a typically rural style. Moving on then, policy T2 relates to managing the transport impact of development. This requires that development demonstrate that measures have been taken to minimise traffic generated and to maximise opportunities for sustainable travel. The location of this particular site means the site is largely reliant on travel by private car. The applicant's submissions highlight that the nature of the use is such that it's reasonable to expect that patrons would be coming by car in any case, irrespective of its location. The Council's Roads Development Management team did indicate that they were satisfied with the adequate level of car parking on site to serve the use. Next up is policy T3 relating to sustainable and active travel. This sets out that new developments must be accompanied by a range of transport modes, must be accessible by a range of transport modes, and places an emphasis on encouraging active and sustainable travel, for example, walking, cycling and public transport. States a need to protect existing links and form new ones where possible, and also provides scope to encourage car sharing and low emission vehicles where possible. The appointed officer's report again concluded that the proposal would not be located conveniently for access via sustainable travel, but it's for members to consider how significant you feel that is in this case. Policy T5, relating to noise, highlights the role of noise impact assessments in establishing the principle of new noise generating uses or new noise sensitive uses close to existing noise sources. Sets out a presumption against noisy uses being located close to existing noise sensitive uses. So in this case, you might reasonably expect there'd be a degree of noise coming from a large number of dogs assembled in one place, and then we have existing residential properties within a sort of fairly close vicinity. So the applicants in this case submitted noise impact assessments in support of their proposal, which were subject to consultation with environmental health, as I mentioned previously. Ultimately, whilst environmental health colleagues had advised that noise could be controlled subject to all of those measures set out in the report being secured and adhered to, the appointed officer had come to the conclusion that some of those measures couldn't actually be reasonably controlled by planning conditions. And on that basis, the officer concluded that the requirements of policy T5 couldn't be met. Turning next to policy NE6, this relates to flooding, drainage and water quality. This is relevant in terms of its requirement for sites to include appropriate sustainable urban drainage systems, and its requirement that a connection to the public sewer will be a prerequisite of all development, with private wastewater systems not permitted in the areas served by the public sewer. In this case, also relevant is the mains water connection. As you heard, the environmental health colleagues would look to recommend that a mains water connection or a mains water supply be secured for the development, and if that wasn't to be the case, then it would need to be adequately justified that that couldn't be done for some sort of insurmountable reason. Failing that, and if a private water supply was to be promoted, they would look to first establish via justification provided by the applicant and prepared by a competent person that the supply was of the requisite standard. Environmental health, as we heard, weren't satisfied that they'd received all the information needed in order for them to be satisfied on that point. Policy R6 relates to waste management requirements for new development. This is really just requiring that new developments include areas for the storage and waste of recyclables. No specific areas are shown on the site plan. However, given the fairly open nature of the site, and it seems like there's ample scope for that to be done if members were minded to reverse the decision. Policy R7 relates to low and zero carbon buildings and water efficiency. And this is requiring that all new buildings achieve specified carbon emissions targets through the incorporation of low and zero carbon generating technologies. So that's things like solar panels or air source heat pumps or the like, along with water saving technologies as set out in the Council's supplementary guidance. That's the sort of matter that we haven't seen details of, but again, in the event that members were minded to overturn the appointed officer's decision, that might readily be conditioned. Just summing up then, we also have other material considerations in terms of Scottish planning policy, which sets out that the purpose of Greenbelt designations is to direct planned growth to the most appropriate locations and support regeneration of urban areas, to protect and enhance the quality, character, landscape setting and identity of towns and cities, and also to protect and give access to open space within and around towns and cities. Excuse me. So, summing up, first and foremost, I think members would need to be establishing for themselves whether they feel like the principle of this development is acceptable in this location, bearing in mind its allocation or its zoning within the Greenbelt in the local development plan. So, do you feel that policy NE2 relating to Greenbelt areas provides for a development of this nature? In terms of design, do you feel like the proposal is of a satisfactory design quality appropriate to its context as required by policy D1? So you might consider factors such as scale, siting, footprint of the buildings and its proportions relative to its surroundings, and materials, colour, those sorts of things. In terms of roads impact, do you feel that the proposal satisfies the terms of policies T2 and T3, which include a requirement that the development minimise traffic generated and maximise opportunities for sustainable and active travel? In relation to noise, do members consider that the proposal satisfies policy T5 and protects amenity from noise impacts associated with the proposed use, bearing in mind the comments of environmental health and the officer's conclusions in terms of the appropriateness of conditions in securing all of those mitigation measures. In terms of private water supply, do members consider that it has been adequately demonstrated that a mains water connection can't be achieved in this location? Moving on from that, has the suitability of the proposed private supply been properly established? So really you're just coming to the conclusion overall on whether the proposal complies with the development plan when considered in the round, and from there to any other material considerations weigh for or against the proposal, for example, Scottish planning policy or any other planning decisions locally. In terms of conditions or reasons for decision, I'm happy to assist with wording or framing any conditions or anything, and I'll just hand back over to you at that point, convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. I think that was actually a very full and comprehensive description of the whole planning application and taking on the neutral view. I think you delivered that very well, actually. And given that we're doing it remotely, thank you for that. I hope the other two councillors found that helpful too. Now, at this point, I think we're allowed to ask for questions, so I'll turn to both my colleagues first. Councillor Sandra MacDonald, do you have any questions?
Thank you, convener. I wondered if the applicant had given any indication. I couldn't see anything in the paperwork of how many people might work at that facility. I mean, I'm expecting it's a 24/7 facility, obviously for what it is, but and then I expect it would be an all-round facility, all year-round facility as well. But it was just to try and get a sense of how many vehicles might be coming and going, not just with people who are using the service, but for those that work there as well.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. I'm afraid I haven't come across anything within the submissions myself that would say how many staff members might be expected on site or in total. So sorry, I'm afraid I can't really answer that question.
I was just reflecting on the number of car parking spaces that are there. There was 18 with an additional 5. Did seem quite a lot, because a lot of the actual business will be people just coming and going to drop off their animals. So it was just to get a sense of that. Okay, and just in terms of other dog facilities like this, I'm not a dog owner myself, so I'm not particularly aware of these, but I know many people that have and have animals, and it does tend to be a source of chat amongst people about where they are and what the facilities that they provide are. And I just wanted to get a sense of facilities, and it might not be relevant to the actual plan, but that we have in front of us. But in terms of facilities that are offered around the city here, is that scale. It's not so much the actual design or anything, but the scale of the number of animals that are expected to be looked after. Is that how does it compare with others? I think is my question. If that's possible, it might not be possible to answer.
Yeah, I know that we have had a couple of other applications in recent years for dog kennels. One was obviously referred to at Tilioch. I know offhand how many animals would be boarded there at any one time. It's the sort of thing that, if members were happy enough for me to just take a couple of minutes I could find out perhaps from the planning portal, but I'm afraid I just don't have the information to hand.
Okay.
That would be useful just to get that, if you could, Gavin, just to round off my question. That would be helpful.
Absolutely, sure. If that's okay, if everyone can just bear with me for a moment, I can look that up.
But
that was all I have to ask, convener.
Gavin, before we you go and look at that information, should we maybe ask Councillor Cameron if he has any questions that you would maybe need to find out information on all at the same time? Maybe that would be helpful. Thanks for your questions, Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Cameron?
Thank you, convener. My questions are, it came out in your presentation, Gavin, but I'm not sure of the relevance to planning. Excuse me. In the environmental health report, I've got a dog barking in the background. My apologies. There is obviously somebody outside. It's not even my dog. We babysit our grandchildren's dog. I'll keep going. She'll stop.
It's very human, so keep going.
Excuse me. The previous application had outside exercising. This application doesn't have any outside exercising. Presumably as part and parcel of the noise issue that had been raised previously. The model license conditions allow both these situations to exist. You can have kennels with no outside exercising. But my reading of them is, I'll get to a question in a minute, sorry. My reading of them is that if you have inside exercising, it must not be shared exercising. So each pen must have its own exercise area.
Okay, I see.
And the plans that we've got are not that. And I suppose you did say that getting a license was a separate issue. My concerns, if we were to overturn the officer's decision, is that in my reading of the license conditions, the plans would not permit a license to be issued. If that were the case, and I am not presuming where we might go, they would then have to come back, wouldn't they? Or would that just be a variation that they could put to officers?
Yeah, ultimately, if members were minded to reverse the appointed officer's decision, and as you say, there is an issue in terms of the layout not being compatible with license conditions, it's likely that we would have to see a revised application come forward. It's not the sort of change I would imagine that could be dealt with informally via there is a mechanism for minor changes to planning applications being approved, but where it's something that would potentially raise issues that have been the subject of previous objection, that's usually a sort of red flag that it should be subject to public scrutiny and a neighbour notification period and everything that comes from that. So I think a formal application would be required. It does sort of present a situation where the review body's decision could sort of paint the applicants into a corner a little bit in terms of how they go about getting a license, and then, you know, if the development's been constructed and then we're presented with a revised application, then, you know, there's a degree of sort of pragmatism that maybe needs to come into play, and your hand's a little bit forced in terms of the development already being there.
Okay,
thank you. Question.
No, that does answer my question, and you know, I'm very happy with, well, happy is the wrong word, but the amount of information that was presented, it was very comprehensive, and your presentation has been equally comprehensive. So I'm relatively comfortable with where we might go with this. I just wanted to get that clarified. Okay, sure. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Mr. Evans, there's just a couple of points. I know you obviously are going to try and seek out some other information for us, but there was something about I read somewhere that I'm just looking at my notes here, the community council's objection was after the date. Is that right? For making objections?
Yeah, that was something that was referred to in the appellant submission. I haven't checked out the dates, but ultimately my understanding of the situation is that the legislation requires the planning authority or the council to provide a minimum amount of time. So there's a specified minimum amount of time for consultees to respond and specifically for community councils to respond. But whether the planning authority allows more time than that minimum is really at their discretion. You know, the overriding aim being to sort of ensure community involvement in planning decisions and, you know, local decision making and all that. So I don't think there's any sort of legislative falling foul in terms of that being accepted at a later date. That's fairly sort of regular occurrence.
But was it where I'm coming to from this? I mean, if it's 21 days or whatever the period of time is, I know, for instance, I have to base it on my experience. If the community council that comes into the ward, if, for instance, they were making a representation, whether for or against, it doesn't really matter. Let's say the cut-off date was Friday, but they don't actually meet till the Monday or Tuesday of the following week when the plans have come up. So it's also to do with the time frame, so that I know that maybe they can phone in, or I've also phoned in for their behalf to say, I know that the community council will be making a representation to you. There'll be some leeway, and my experience of 12 years has usually been, or is that you know, there will be a little bit of leeway, but you know, maybe a few days a week, but not much more than that. So I suppose I was just trying to seek clarity as to how much later the representation was.
I'm afraid I don't have the dates to hand. Generally speaking, we do have a Concord Act with the community councils that sort of sets out some procedures, and generally speaking, if they let us know that a response is going to be late because the community council can't meet or whatever else, we're normally quite happy to agree to an extension to that period.
Yeah.
I couldn't say for certain whether an extension was agreed in this case or whether it was just accepted after the closing date, but you know, that's the sort of normal process.
Well, you've basically confirmed what I've said. They would allow if you notified them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to also ask about, you know, given the life that we're living right now, and also just how the general economy is, would there be scope for development within sort of a farm to allow to do something? I'll say slightly different, because to me, kennels don't seem that far removed from a farm.
Yeah, Scottish planning policy does support rural diversification and farm diversification. Sorry, that's a mouthful for me. In rural areas, I suppose that needs, in decision-making terms, to be balanced against green belts, which obviously are rural in character, but in terms of their location are on the edge of settlements, and there are additional policy restrictions imposed by SPP and by the relevant local development plan in terms of what might be appropriate there. You know, we're not talking about a sort of a remote rural location here. So there is a sort of greater sense of restriction in greenbelt areas. There is provision for departure from greenbelt policies, and it's really up to members to consider whether you feel that's warranted in this case. Over and above that's obviously establishing the principle of development. Over and above that, we've also got the sort of technical issues to one side. So it's sort of one follows the other.
Thank you for that. My other thought is in terms of sort of transport for sustainability. I would have thought for most kennels, it's not just like taking a small, it's not like going to the vet, you maybe take your rabbit and you can walk out your house and walk to your local vet. I would have thought that it was quite acceptable to take a dog in a car to kennels, and that, you know, having a transport system in place isn't really relevant for the location. And you know, I mean, how can you take maybe realistically take a dog on a bus route to a kennel? I don't know how realistic that is. So I would have thought going in a car was acceptable to have traffic moving around. I also query the noise aspect. I would anticipate that people are able to, they could be walking with their dogs in that locality anyway. And just like Councillor Cameron, and this is not a criticism at all, it's just very human, that, you know, there is a dog barking, you know, well, okay, there could be a child crying. I mean, is it that just people could be walking around? There could be a walking group of dogs walking, and in terms, and they equally could be barking. So I was wondering about the context of noise and what noise can't be controlled. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
I do, yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of the extent to which noise can be controlled, I think that's perhaps a point that was picked up in the appointed officer's report, where they're referring to this previous Scottish Government reporter's decision, which sort of said, well, if you're approving kennels, there's only so far you can go with imposing management restrictions via planning conditions, and those being enforceable and meeting the relevant tests for planning conditions. It's a reasonable expectation that if there's a kennels there might be dogs exercised outside. As you say, people can walk their dogs freely where they like. Whether they will be walking 28 dogs at one time is, you know, another matter. And, you know, it is a fixed location, so the environmental health would perhaps be best to answer this question, but I suppose noise impact takes account of the frequency, the duration, the sort of intermittency of a noise. You know, if it's low level background noise, that's one thing, but if it's sort of occasional throughout the day and quite sort of sudden, that can be a different type of disturbance or nuisance that's caused. So
okay, thanks for that, Mr. Evans. So I said a number there of 28 dogs there, or 28 dog walkers. So you're going to go and try and clarify the number of dogs that could actually be kept in the kennel.
Yes, I've managed to find the appeal decision just while we were talking on the Scottish Government's website. So if I can just flick off for 2 seconds, I'll quickly see if I can open things up. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So, Councillor MacDonald, you'd asked about the scale of perhaps existing kennels. I'm afraid I haven't been able to find anything terribly helpful there, because the reporter's appeal decision was obviously relating to a refused scheme, but in terms of scale, that was for 11 animals at any one time. We've also got an application from 2014, which again was refused. If I just open up the report from that, I should be able to get an indication of how many animals that was for. So I'm afraid that doesn't really help in terms of establishing what size, existing premises in operation would be, but maybe gives you an indication of what we've seen in the past.
Thanks through you, convener. That's helpful, and it's not hugely coming into what I'm thinking around what we've got in front of us. So, but it's thank you for trying to get that information. It doesn't really hugely impact on what I'm thinking, but it's helpful to have that, to be honest.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. So when you mentioned 28, that was just a spurious remark, really?
No, 28 is what's proposed in front of us today. 28 separate pens within the development. I was just looking at other sites there to see if we could get a gauge for how that is relative.
So is that 28 in total?
Yes,
28.
that's right. Yeah, it's 28
Thank
separate
you.
little pens, if you like.
Okay. Another question actually I had, would it be, I think when you were showing the drawings or the photographs, actually you mentioned that there was no windows in the rear, but that would be normal, wouldn't it, for that
Yes.
type of building? Yes.
Well, this is the thing, I suppose. The building obviously has a specific use, and that use imposes itself on the form of the building. So there's a question there for members in terms of how appropriate that is to the greenbelt setting and whatever else. Because the front portion of the house or the property is described in the officer's report as, looking to all intents and purposes like a suburban house, but then there's this long elongated wing that comes out the back and doesn't have any windows in it. So I guess there's a question of how that sits alongside the existing farm buildings. Is it a house? Is it a farm building? Is it somewhere in between? And how appropriate do you think that looks?
So obviously I know we have to take each planning application on its merit on the day. Obviously we read everything beforehand, formulate a decision, as we're talking now, it'll be going through members' minds. So we can't really say precedent at all, is my understanding. I do wonder though, and I'm going to probably pronounce it wrong, but is it the Tilioch? Is it Tilioch? Tilioch?
Tilioch, I think. Yeah.
Tilioch, thank you. That one was approved. So how does that sit with this one?
Well, I don't know the full background to that case, but you're right. Ultimately, all applications will be considered on their specific merits, and there are myriad different circumstances. I don't know what the relationship with the Tilioch site was to existing residential uses. That can affect how significant noise is as an issue.
Sorry, that's my phone going off. Sorry. There's
okay.
4 of us working in the house, and like everybody else, I'm just being honest.
That's fine.
It's the human aspect. I do apologise.
If you hear a screaming child in the background, that'll probably
I thought
be
I did, actually. We're doing our best we can, as they say.
Yeah. So, as you say, ultimately, all proposals are slightly different in terms of their individual merits and circumstances. You can draw some parallels, yes, but ultimately they'll never be entirely the same. So, it's worthwhile exercising caution in sort of comparing.
Okay. So after all of those questions, I'll just check. Councillor Cameron, do you have any further questions?
No, thank you, convener.
Okay, Councillor MacDonald.
Could I ask, through you, convener, if Gavin could just put back up for me to have a look at again the slide which shows the form, the actual building. So
is that the layout one?
Not the layout one. Yeah. So there are windows in the roof there. I just wanted to check that on one side.
Yeah.
In the middle, in those 2 bits there. Fine. Okay. And I just and if you could go back to the layout for me for just a minute. Thank
Sure.
you. And have you got the the other one I wanted to have a look at was just the one that showed the front and the back of the house.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members, for your questions. Thank you, Mr. Evans. So, members, do you feel that you have sufficient information to take a decision on this planning application? So I will turn firstly, in terms of the determination, Councillor Cameron, I'm just reading from the here. Do you feel you're ready to make a determination?
Yes, convener.
Okay, I'll ask Councillor MacDonald, do you feel you're ready to make a determination?
Yes, I am, convener.
Okay, and just to make sure, just for avoidance of doubt, and because we're doing it remotely, everyone feels there's been enough discussion, questions asked, and you feel comfortable in your own minds about doing it, making a determination.
Yes.
Absolutely. I thought
that. Just you know, obviously this goes out to the public, so I just want to make sure that we're doing it all correctly and that we're quite content. I'm also happy enough to make a determination on this planning application, and I'm happy to go first. So I would actually be approving the application, and I will give my reasons shortly. Councillor Cameron, would you want to state your determination?
Yes, I would be upholding the officer's recommendations to refuse the application.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald?
I too would be upholding the officer's recommendations to refuse. I don't know if you want us to go into the reasons why at the moment, but I could give those as well.
Okay, so well, I would be allowing the application. I've read this and I've thought about it a lot, listened to the answers. As I see it, first I don't think the building in itself is detrimental. What's being proposed is almost behind the house. I think it's quite sympathetic in that they're using natural slate instead of wood for doors. I think we have to take cognizance of an application that's already been approved, particularly off. I believe that it is important to diversify. I don't think that is contrary to the local development plan. I think it's not relevant to talk about transport and excessive transport going to the premises. I doubt that very much. I think it's going to blend in actually quite well. I know in the past, when I've chaired the local review, that if there's areas of concern but we want to approve it, then through the officer input, we can actually put in things like, say, you must comply with whether it's water, drainage, any other massing that might be on the building to ensure that the soundproofing is taken into account. I think it's very easy that people can walk their dogs around there. I don't think that the sound level will actually impact the area. Also, I would have, because we've not been given the date, I would actually have a concern just in terms of county council, but fully accept that they only meet usually monthly, and it might be difficult to get them in. But I also know the council is very convivial to taking a phone call, knowing that representation can be made. I would be more concerned that a building or farm or business went out of business if we're turning down an application. I don't think it's relevant to say there might be several kennels in the area because coffee shops are springing up all over the place, and we don't say, well, there's too many coffee shops, because I think that's what's called natural competition, and that actually improves and enhances businesses. So obviously I've not applied any of the technical terms in terms of policies, but I think under policy NEC, I think canals kind of go hand in hand with farmlands. I think what's being proposed doesn't go against policy D1 in welcome, safe and pleasant space, easy, resourceful, efficient. I would have thought those were actually all fulfilled. Then I think it also qualifies for policy NE6 in terms of water supply. We can, under policy R7, if any conditions need to be put in place, that we can actually do that ourselves. The roads seem to be quite happy with what is actually being proposed in terms of traffic. Yeah, it does actually. Yeah, I think I've actually raised quite a lot of my case on. Actually, I'm concerned that one has actually been approved and this one hasn't. And I dare say that the applicant will come back again. I suppose it's within the allotted time period that they will come back again. So I think the application should have been approved. We're not also going to agree on that unless you change your mind now that I've said I do actually. I'm not sure where we go here with it now. Is it so? Do we go? So
Councillor Cameron can just, sorry, Councillor Cameron can just do his reasons, and then Councillor MacDonald.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, convener. My reasons are basically the reasons outlined by the officer in their reason for recommendation of refusal, which can be found on page 49 of our papers. The proposal would result in development within an area of agricultural land forming part of a wider farming operation and will be for a use which is deemed to be neither essential for agriculture nor associated with an existing activity. The proposed development would therefore be contrary to the expectations of the Scottish planning policy and would clearly fail to comply with the requirements of policy NE2, which is Green Belt, and Aberdeen City Local Development Plan. The proposed development doesn't reflect the existing development pattern, nor is it of a form, scale, massing, or have the design characteristics appropriate for a rural setting, and therefore does not address the expectations of policy D1, quality placemaking by design, whilst deemed to be partially compliant with the requirements of policy T2, managing the transport impact of development. The proposed development, my mod.gov has just crashed. If I could say, Lindsay, it's everything that's there except number 3. Number 3 was suggesting that if it was approved, it would set a precedent. I don't necessarily agree with that, but all of paragraph 1 and all of paragraph 2 in the officer's recommendation. Is that okay while I try and retrieve my mod.gov?
No,
Thank you.
Maybe I could.
Sorry, so Councillor MacDonald.
Yes, thank you, convener. Yeah, the reasons for that I would give for upholding the officer's recommendations are mainly around the use of green belt, and I do have considerable thoughts of those that are trying to run a business in that area and what can you do to keep your business afloat. And I think I have a huge sympathy with those that are trying to find ways to do things differently. But I do think that in this planning application, I would also agree that policy D1 has not, it is not of a design that I think is of quality that we would want to see in this part of the green belt. On the transport issue, I take the point, and I think it's absolutely right that when you're bringing your animals there, you will come by car. But I think an application now has to consider not just those who work and in the facility, how they get back and forward from work, and are there things that can be done to reduce the carbon footprint of that. And I think, you know, that should be part of an application of this nature, and that wasn't there. But I do take the point that has been made about the nature of where it is. On the noise issue and flooding issue, particularly on the noise issue, I think that hasn't really been addressed, and I understand the issues around enforcement that have been made. On the thing about whether a precedent has been set, I didn't really see that. I wasn't really thinking of that in terms of you know, maybe the form and the size and the shape and all the rest of it. So again, you know, whether that was something I would really take into account, like Councillor Cameron, I'm not sure in a singular sense, but certainly as part of the green belt, I just feel that the application does not meet the planning needs for that area and the planning policies that we have in place. So I would still offer that I would be refusing this.
Okay, thank you, councillors, for your determination. So just the rest of me just to say that it's not what I would agree with. We're obviously there to sort of scrutinise and challenge as well, I suppose, in terms of the local review body. You've made your determination. 2 councillors against me. So the determination is then that the officers applicate the planning officer's determination. Thank you very much. Do we just now do I just now leave Mrs. McBain and Councillor Bolton steps in, or is there anything else I need to do?
No, that's all. Thank you very much. So Councillor Stewart and MacDonald can now leave, and we'll proceed with the second case.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Bolton will now take over as the chair.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just wait. Okay, I think you're fine to go.
Thanks very much, Ms. McBain, and also welcome Councillor Bell, who's come in place of Councillor MacDonald. Okay, so just for clarity on the recording, myself, Councillor Bolton, will now chair the meeting along with Councillors Bell and Cameron in attendance. Can I ask all the attendees, you can leave your camera on, of course I'm quite happy with that. If you could mute your microphone when you're not speaking. The microphone should only be switched on when you're invited to speak. Guidance on how to do this is contained in the guidance issued to you. I will now ask the clerk, just for completeness, to advise of the members participating today and for all members to confirm their attendance once their names have been announced by the clerk, so that it is clear for the recording of the meeting and can also be recorded by the clerk for the minute. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that they should not leave the room during this consideration of any application. Can I just get you to do a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. So just for the recording, if we can just state that you're present. So Councillor Bolton?
Present.
Councillor Bell?
Present.
And Councillor Cameron?
Present.
Okay, back to you, convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McBain. Now turning to consideration of the second review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a 1.5-storey extension to the rear at 30 West Mount Street, Aberdeen, application 200502. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with necessary planning guidance, because he's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will, however, not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect his role will be a neutral one, having involved the provision of factual information and guidance only. And with that said, Mr. Evans, over to yourself.
Thank you, convener. Again, I'll just get the presentation up here. 2 seconds. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that now.
That's it. Yeah, thank you, Gavin.
Great. Thank you, convener. So the second review before us today is in relation to an application refused under delegated powers for the erection of a 1.5 storey extension to the rear of 30 West Mount Street, Aberdeen. I'm afraid I'll have to just quickly start with a correction. The last slide in today's presentation refers to an earlier LRB decision at West North Street instead of West Mount Street. That's just me getting a little bit confused on that one. In this case, the review was again found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months from the appointed officer's refusal. No new matters have been raised. However, the appellant has stated that their view is that the review should proceed on the basis of a site inspection to allow members to understand the surrounding context firsthand. So I'll give you an introduction and sort of overview and then hand back to you, convener, for members to take a view on that.
Many thanks.
Okay, sorry, I'll just make this full screen actually. There we go. Okay, so the application site for this application comprises a 1.5 storey mid-terrace dwelling of traditional granite construction, along with associated front and rear gardens. The property is located at the western end of West Mount Street, on its northern side and close to its junction with View Terrace. The surrounding area is predominantly residential in character, which is reflected in its local development plan zoning as a residential area where policy H1 will apply. The site also lies within the Rosemount and Westburn Conservation Area. To the rear of the dwelling, a historic single-storey annex projects along the boundary adjoining number 28 West Mount Street. A later single-storey extension is also present on the opposite boundary shared with number 40 View Terrace. We've got some photos which illustrate that a little better, so I'll just flick through to those.
That's always helpful.
So that's just the property from the front with the blue bay window there. You can see the front elevation is obviously unchanged by the proposal, so it's just getting your bearings really. So this is to the rear. I think these photos were provided by the applicant in their submission. So we have extensions on both boundaries essentially protruding from the rear face of the building. This more sort of rendered lean to onto the boundary with number 40 View Terrace, and then you get a better view of this one along the boundary with number 28 West Mount Street. It's just a view from the sort of narrow rear lane that just serves this short terrace of 3 properties, just allowing access to the rear gardens. You can just see that on the plan here. So you go in via View Terrace, and that little lane just serves these 3. Excuse me. And that's the view from View Terrace. So just giving an indication of how prominent or otherwise any extension might be from that sort of public vantage point. So sorry, yes, just going back to my text here, the appointed officer's report does highlight that there's a narrow pedestrian lane running to the rear of the terrace from View Terrace, offering access. And you can't quite see that, but it's just, sorry, on the right-hand image here, it's just to the left-hand side of where that garage is, just at the end of the property boundary. Moving on, that's the site plan as proposed. We didn't have a site plan as existing. I think with this application it's shown very faintly dashed grey there. It's not terribly easy to discern, but it's just showing the two sort of rear elevations. So the proposal in this case seeks permission for the construction of a 1.5 storey extension to the rear of 30 West Mount Street. The extension is comprised of, if I just flick forwards there, the ground floor plan in fact shows it better than the site plan there. You can see the existing and proposed. The extension is comprised of, firstly, a flat-roofed ground floor extension occupying the full width of the plot and projecting 5.5 metres from the rear wall of the dwelling. So you can see that projection there. What you can just make out there is that the adjoining property at View Terrace has an existing rear offshoot itself. So what's proposed here at ground floor level will be simply matching that projection, which is relevant in terms of its impact at ground floor level. So if we just flick back, you can see there how that steps out and what's present in the application property. So yes, the second element of the proposal is a pitched roof element of first floor level, which measures 2.8 metres wide and projects 4 metres along the western boundary, i.e. the upper storey occupies a smaller footprint than the ground floor extension and is set back from the edge of the roof below. So you can just see that there. The elevations are perhaps more useful. The front elevation obviously doesn't change, all the work's taking place to the rear. And then in this slide, we've got existing to the left and proposed to the right. The first floor portion of the extension is of a pitched roof design, achieving 5.5 metres to eaves height, so just referring to that point there, and 6.3 metres to ridge level. The extension would be formed using timber cladding on its rear elevation and one side elevation, that being the eastern elevation facing towards number 28, with the other side elevation to number 40 View Terrace, given a dry dash rendered finish. The plans also refer to UPVC framed windows and doors, with the flat roof formed in rubber roofing and the pitched roof first floor element finished in natural slate. The officer's report notes that the finish of fascias, referring to sort of these parts here, hasn't been specified, but in the event that members were minded to overturn, that's the sort of detail that you could establish via condition. So this is the existing elevation sort of internally from within that space looking towards either boundary. So just seeing the two offshoots at number 28 at the moment. And then this is the side elevations as proposed. So as I mentioned, one side elevation treated with the timber linings and one with the rendered finish. This is in terms of planning history. In June of 2019, excuse me, planning permission was granted for the erection of a single-storey rear extension at this address. The current proposal matches the scale of that ground floor extension, but adds further accommodation at the first floor level. So this slide just shows the plans for that earlier approval. So you can see that it's basically exactly the same, but what we're currently faced with adds that accommodation at the upper level. Also relevant in terms of planning history out with the site is application 180129 on this next slide. In October of 2018, Aberdeen City Council's local review body reversed the appointed officer's earlier refusal of this application for the construction of a 1.5-storey rear extension at a neighbouring property at number 20 West Mount Street. These slides just demonstrate the plans that were approved via the local review body's decision that day, as well as a photograph of the completed extension, which has been provided by the applicants as part of their supporting case. So if we just flick on to that. So this is the extension that was approved by the LRB, now completed and in situ. So that gives you an indication of the scale of that. In terms of the appointed officer's decision and reasons for that decision, a full copy of the decision notice is included in pages 173 to 175 of the agenda pack. The main reasons refer to the following factors, or the main key points come out from that. Firstly, the design, massing and form were seen as being incongruous due to the upper storey projecting approximately 1.5 metres above the wall head. So just to flick back, when we're referring to the wall head, we're just talking about that junction between the roof and the wall of the property, and the 1.5 metres we're talking about is the sort of projection above that wall head level. The 5.5 metre projection to the rear was seen as being excessive. Worth bearing in mind, of course, that the ground floor extension had previously been approved by the planning authority, so to some extent that has been established by an earlier decision. The extension was seen as being readily visible from View Terrace to the west of the site, which was considered to adversely affect the character and visual amenity of the streetscape and be detrimental to the character and appearance of the Rosemount and Westburn Conservation Area. Again, we've got the photographs from View Terrace, so you can go back to those, or I can go back to those if you like, just to get on a look at that. So the decision notice continues. There would be a significant adverse impact on residential amenity at number 40 Westmount Street due to the overbearing presence and significant impact on the existing level of privacy. It was considered that there would be conflict with the Householder Development Guide supplementary guidance, which does not provide for two-storey extensions to mid-terraced properties or projections of more than 3 metres along the boundary of a mid-terraced property. It was the officer's view that no specific circumstances in this case would warrant a departure from those policy points. It was also considered that there would be conflict with Scottish planning policy, historic environment policy for Scotland, and policies D1 relating to design quality, H1 relating to residential areas, and D4 relating to historic environment of the local development plan, along with the Householder Development Guide and the Historic Environment Scotland Managing Change in the Historic Environment document relating to extensions, as well as the aims of the Rosemount and Westburn Conservation Area Character Appraisal. And the officer concluded that there was conflict with the equivalent policies in the emerging proposed local development plan as well, and ultimately no material planning considerations in this case were identified that would warrant the granting of planning permission contrary to the development plan. Turning then to the appellant's case, the applicant submitted a statement in support of the application for local review, which is available at pages 185 to 192 of the agenda pack. The main points put forward are as follows. Firstly, disputes the view that the extension is not in keeping with its surroundings, highlights that the reasons for refusal refer to a 5.5 metre projection being excessive. However, a single-storey extension of the same projection was approved on this site. Notes also that the ground floor projection simply matches that of the adjoining neighbour's extension. Contends also that any impact on the streetscape and character of the conservation area is not significant. Highlights that no objections were received and that the proposed extension can only be seen from a small number of properties. Highlights that View Terrace is a dead-end street, which limits the prominence of the extension and I think to some extent the footfall that would be passing by. Highlights also that reading the same sentence again, highlights that the application property currently has a full view of the garden at 40 View Terrace, and therefore the formation of the proposed extension would actually reduce the amount of overlooking by blocking existing views from the dormer window that's already there. Considers also that the earlier LRB decision at 20 Westmount Street sets a precedent for extensions of this scale to properties of this size. Turning to the consultation responses, there were no objections from consultees and no response from the local Rosemount and Mile End Community Council. There were also no representations from members of the public. At that point, convener, I'd just hand back to you for members to consider whether they think a site inspection would be warranted in this case.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Members, we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated that a site visit should be conducted for determination. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request a site visit be undertaken, further written information be provided, or that a hearing be arranged. I'll go to yourself first, Councillor Bell. Do you feel you've got sufficient information to take the decision today, or would you require further procedure, i.e. a site visit or
Convener, I think I have enough information to actually make a decision.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Convener. I would agree with Mr. Bell. I think I have enough information to make a decision.
Okay, I'm just trying to move my camera in case I'm kind of seem to be glowing. So I'm just trying to make sure you can still see me. I equally agree. I think the pictures provided were very helpful, and certainly I think if we need further clarifications on any particular aspect, we can always go to Google Maps, which is provided quite well for the latest LRBs that we've needed. So I think we'll move forward now that we all feel that we have sufficient information. So as members feel that they have the sufficient information, we can now hear from Mr. Evans on the relevant policies and consideration for this review. Mr. Evans.
Oh, sorry, still muted. Thank you, convener.
That's okay.
Right, so moving on. As I mentioned before, the application site's located in an H1 residential area under the current local development plan. This sets out a number of criteria that new development must satisfy. These are listed on this slide here. So firstly, is the proposal overdevelopment? Would it have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? That's one where members will have to exercise their judgment about what you feel the character and amenity of the area is, and how and to what extent this proposal would affect that. Would it result in the loss of open space? No public open space is affected here, and the works are entirely within a residential curtilage. And does it comply with supplementary guidance? In this case, the relevant supplementary guidance is the Householder Development Guide. That slide bears another couple of references, but you can just disregard those. It's a Householder Development Guide that's relevant in this case. And I'll move on to that shortly. Also relevant is policy D1 relating to design quality, stating that all development must ensure high standards of design and have a strong and distinctive sense of place, which is a result of context appraisal, detailed planning, quality architecture, craftsmanship and materials. Proposals will also be assessed against the following 6 essential qualities. That development should be distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to move around, adaptable and resource efficient. Policy D4 in relation to the historic environment states that Aberdeen City Council will protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance. That national policy and guidance would include Historic Environment Scotland's Managing Change series, which includes a publication on extensions that we'll come back to again in a moment. D4 continues that high quality design which respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment and protects the special architectural and historic interest of its listed buildings and conservation areas will be supported. So it's not saying that development in historic context is not possible. It's simply that it has to be of an appropriate quality and preserve the historic interest of what's there. Turning to the supplementary guidance then, the Householder Development Guide sets out a number of general principles first and foremost. Those include that extensions should be architecturally compatible with the original house and the surrounding area in terms of design, scale, etc. Proposals should not dominate or overwhelm an original house and should remain visually subservient or subordinate. Extension should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, loss of daylight, or general amenity from excessive visual impact. Approvals predating this guidance should not be taken as representing a precedent. The built footprint of a dwelling house as extended should not exceed twice that of the original dwelling. We can see from the floor plans and the existing and proposed site plan that this wouldn't double the existing footprint. Also, no more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. Again, you can see from the proposed and existing site plan that the garden ground is still quite sufficient to the rear. In relation to terrace dwellings, there are some specific points set out by the supplementary guidance. Single-storey extensions to terrace dwellings will be restricted to 3 metres in projection along a mutual boundary. It's worth noting in this case the presence of existing extensions to the neighbouring properties, which serves to mitigate the impact of going beyond that 3 metre projection. And this is something that officers would commonly be looking out for. There's no need to restrict something to 3 metres if its impact is not going to be significant due to some site-specific circumstances like another property on the boundary. And secondly, extensions of more than 1 storey will normally be refused where the proposal runs along a mutual boundary unless it can be demonstrated that the specific circumstances of the site and the proposal would ensure that there would be no detriment to the character or amenity of the area. So that's just expressing a general presumption against two-storey extensions to terrace properties along a boundary, but leaves it open to consider whether there are specific circumstances that in this case would justify doing so. Excuse me. In terms of other material considerations, Scottish planning policy as regards conservation areas states that proposals in conservation areas should preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, and that proposals that do not harm the character or appearance should be treated as preserving it. Historic Environment Scotland's extensions guidance from its Managing Change in the Historic Environment series also sets out some key criteria for extensions. Firstly, proposals must protect the character and appearance of a building. They should be subordinate in scale and in form, and should be located on a secondary elevation. They must be designed in a high quality manner using appropriate materials, and extensions that would unbalance a symmetrical elevation and threaten the original design concept should be avoided. Where an extension is built beside a principal elevation, it should normally be lower than and set back behind that facade. In this case, obviously, all of the works are taking place to the rear, so a couple of those points are less relevant. I think you would perhaps want to focus on whether you feel the proposal has been designed in a high quality manner with appropriate materials, and whether it's subordinate in scale and form and protects the character and appearance of the building. As I mentioned, the site lies within the Rosemountain Westburn Conservation Area, so the character appraisal for that conservation area is of some relevance. This identifies two distinct character areas within the conservation area. In this case, the site is within Area B, which is Rosemount Place North. Page 29 notes that there's considerable variety in the houses on the streets between Rosemount Place and Westburn Road. And page 30 describes Westmount Street as being largely made up of 2.5-storey properties with a small terrace of 1.5-storey cottages to the western end. The application site forms part of that small terrace referred to there. The SWOT analysis of character area B at page 44 does not highlight any issues that appear to be of direct relevance to the proposed development in this case. So in summing up and coming to your decision, the following points would be central. First and foremost, the zoning of the policy of the site within an H1 residential area. Do members feel that the proposal complies with the tests set out in policy H1, including compliance with relevant supplementary guidance in the Householder Development Guide? Is the proposal of sufficient design quality appropriate to its context, as required by policy D1? And would the proposal preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with policy D4? So ultimately, you're coming to the conclusion on whether you feel this complies with the development plan in the round. And are there any other material considerations, for example, SPP, Historic Environment Scotland's guidance, and the LRB's earlier decision at 30 Westmount Street? Sorry, 20 Westmount Street. This is 30 Westmount Street, isn't it?
30 West North Street.
Yeah, oh, I know. And,
so which one is it? Which one is it, Gavin? You just start again.
Yeah, I'll start again.
Yeah.
So yeah, ultimately, do any of those factors weigh either for or against the proposal sufficient to outweigh the development plan in this case? Again, happy to assist with any questions or conditions or wording for reasons for decision, convener. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Cameron, have you questions for Mr. Evans?
Thank you, convener. In the reasons for decisions, the second bullet point about 5.5 metre projection from the rear being excessive, but that was already approved, wasn't it, for this property with a single-storey extension?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay,
that's really
that's fine. No, that answers that question. My other question is at the other end of their recommendation or decisions, conflicts with equivalent policies in the proposed Aberdeen Local Development Plan.
Mm-hmm.
Surely at this stage we can't use an emerging plan that hasn't actually exist. It doesn't actually exist and has not been formalised as a reason to refuse something. Am I correct?
Well, there's a sort of sliding scale of weight to be attributed to a proposed plan. It's a bit of a semantic planning argument, but once the proposed plan is initially published and once it's been through various stages of consultation, once it's been approved by the council, it represents the council's settled view on what should be within the plan, and at that point it starts to gather some weight. But you're right, it's not the extant development plan, and that forms the basis for our decision making in the first instance. It's simply a material consideration in the background that you decide how much weight it deserves.
No, that's super. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor Cameron. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. So planning application 150592 was approved in June 19. So that was this property 30 West Mount Street, approved 2019. And that was timber clad, was it? That the approval.
The ground floor extension to this property, yes, that's right.
Okay. Could I perhaps look at number 20, please? You briefly showed that at the very start of your presentation.
Yeah, sure. 2 seconds, Councillor Bell. There we go. So that's the plans on that first slide, and then the photograph is perhaps better in terms of showing it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So, do you have a? I mean, do you have an aerial view of that? Perhaps a Google view, just to give us.
Yeah, I can.
Perspective of where where actually it is located.
I can have a look. I'm not sure whether the aerial views will be sufficiently up to date to show that. But I'll just check.
Thank you.
Yeah, it'd be helpful even to see where that's placed within a street.
Yeah.
I think we actually took this one to site visit because I do recall it.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's already a 1.5 story extension to the rear of it because that side window was overlooking this particular house. It was slightly different. I like your friend, David.
Thank you. She was barking when Jennifer was on.
Yeah, I came in to back into the room and I thought, why did I hear barking? Oh, thanks, Kevin.
So this is the aerial view of number 20 on the council's mapping system. I don't think that shows the extension at this point. I think that's just an area of paving that you're seeing there. And it's annotated as being from 2019. I'll just check Google as well to see if there's anything more recent.
You're better with these than I am.
Funny, I was just panicking there about how I got back to satellite view. I was just doing it quietly.
That's okay.
This is the point where I attempt to figure out which property we're looking at. So 7th in, 4th down after the brick.
I'll print it that, Kevin.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I don't think it's shown there. I think you can just see the whitewashed wall on the edge of a sort of rear shed there.
Yeah.
So I don't think the rear extension is shown, I'm afraid.
Can you zoom down into it, Gavin? Just, is that possible?
A little bit. It doesn't get any clearer, I'm afraid. I
No.
think part of the basis for the approval at that property at number 20 was the existence of a very large extension to the neighbouring property, which I think may have been historic rather than a sort of modern addition.
Sorry, is that helpful, Councillor Bell?
It is, yes. So it's less incongruous, isn't it, really, that compared to number 30, which is, which almost backs onto View Terrace.
It certainly doesn't have that same relationship with a sort of public vantage point. Yes, I think that's fair.
Yeah. And so last question. So for number 30, then the timber cladding, is that? I can only think visual now. So is that vertical cladding or is it horizontal?
I think for the current application, the proposed, sorry, the one at number 20 was horizontal.
It's horizontal, exactly, yes.
But I think the current proposal is, oh no, it's horizontal as well. It's horizontal at ground floor level and vertical, yeah, so it's a mix, really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Is that all your questions, Councillor Bell? Yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Oh, and well, no, very quickly. I mean, clearly, though, those buildings at the back, Mr. Evans, they're all going to be infilled, aren't they? So they're not going to be taken down, and that wouldn't be particularly cost effective.
No, I think those are taken down. The existing offshoots to the rear, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, my understanding is those would be demolished.
Ah, okay. So how would the builders gain access to do that?
I don't know for certain. Not something that we would tend to get too involved in, right, unless there was a sort of wider amenity issue for neighbours. But it's certainly a problem to be overcome.
Right. Okay. That's they're using sky hooks maybe to do it.
Okay. Okay. Aaron, can I ask you to go back to the photographs of the application as opposed to the other house?
Mm-hmm. 2 seconds. Here we go. So just direct me as you need.
Okay. You stop there just a sec. So the sign was closed on it, or the building was closed on it. Is that currently part of the application site?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just trying to work out how they demolished that part of the building, given it looks like it's attached to the house next door. So it looks like it's obviously an existing, an original feature potentially, because it looks like it's attached. If you look at the roof line.
Just up at this level, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. The original sheds probably would have been sort of spanning the 2 views and shared between the 2. And then there's been a sort of later addition. But
there's been no representation from the neighbouring property now.
No.
Okay. Then if you go to the other side, the other picture, and we've got, I don't know, it looks like a whole bunker or something. I'm not quite sure what it is. That again is attached to the existing footprint of that house. It's of that application house. Yeah.
Yeah, it's attached to the application property, but it's also attached to the party wall and the extension to number 40 View Terrace as well.
Can you go to the picture that shows us looking across at the backs, if you like?
Like that one?
No, was there one from the street?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's. Gosh. Okay, that's fine. And can I have an aerial view, please?
I think so. There we go. It's a little bit further out than you might like.
So it's pretty close to the end of the group of housing, but also it gives me an idea of what exists currently along that back, number of housing. I'm just trying to work out if there's any of them more than single story along that line, Gavin. It's sort of towards the other end. I think, is that?
Are you meaning the extensions here, whether those are more than single story?
Yeah.
I didn't think so. I think the best view is perhaps just from that one.
Yeah.
So there's at number 40 View Terrace, the extension to the rear is obviously of a sort of modern, fairly unsympathetic construction.
Yeah,
and it has quite a projection to it as well. I think it was matching the 5.5 meters that was approved previously here. So that's a pretty significant projection on a terrace property, albeit an end terrace, but it is over a single story, so you can still sort of discern the roof line and dormer windows and things.
Well, that's what I was going to say, but although maybe it's a single story, but we've got interesting windows in the roof, which are pretty horrendous. One mistake should allow another. I'm not suggesting that, so based on balanced. Can I just understand as well, the singles, the top floor, if you like, how far did that project out? Because it wasn't as far as the bottom floor.
That's right, yeah. I think that was 4 meters. Yeah, it's annotated in that drawing as 4 meters. So it's set in 1.5 meters from the edge of the flat roofed ground floor part.
Okay. And if they left underneath, is it just a flat roof that's going to be there?
Yeah, just a flat roof. So there's no sort of step out balcony or anything like that.
Okay. All right. Has anybody got any other questions? Do we want to see any more photographs, or are we quite content with what we've got? Right. Councillor Bell, are you in a position that you'd like to state your decision and in respect to this application, the grounds for that?
Yes. So as far as policy D1 is concerned, design quality, I think it'll have a very strong and distinctive sense of place. That's for sure. The timber cladding, I thought was totally out of keeping with the area. Precedent's already been set though with number 20, but also with this ground floor extension having been previously given permission. So that doesn't apply. As far as residential impact, policy H1, again, if the existing dormer is actually to be removed and visibility to surrounding area reduced with this extension, then again that probably actually doesn't apply either. H1 historic environment. Well, it's
Sorry, Phil, Councillor Bell, I don't think they're removing the dormer. It's the roof light that's currently there. I know where you're coming from because I think Mr. Evans.
I thought it was being. No, it's going to be built out, surely.
Mr. Evans, can you maybe just clarification for Councillor Bell?
Yeah, I think the applicant in their submission referred to the upper floor portion of the extension obscuring the view from the existing dormer, so it wouldn't remove the dormer entirely, it would just block the view.
Okay.
Right. It would offer more privacy, is what they're trying to suggest.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I got the privacy bit, but I thought the being built out would have actually that would have been it. No, so you couldn't look down into adjacent gardens.
Yeah.
No.
You can't look down with it, that will block it.
Okay. I mean, the fact that number 20 is a virtually identical extension, the precedent's already set there, isn't it? So I really don't see why this shouldn't be allowed, to be honest, as the precedent's already been set.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Cameron. I'm just leaving you guys to it today.
I was thinking that, convener. That's
I know.
very unfair. Right now that we have resolved the dormer situation,
yeah,
and because I think that the appeal caused the confusion. I find myself very much in line with Councillor Bell and his logic for suggesting that this extension should be approved. I can try and repeat everything Councillor Bell said, but basically, I agree with his logic in terms of these policies.
Okay, thank you. It is a slightly difficult one, and I understand where both of you are coming from, because clearly, we have a single story that's already been approved, which is out with our guidance of 3 meters to 5.5 meters. So, this and the use of wood, which again, the material's already been approved. Now, I did on the site visit to the other one, which we did approve. It different configuration that there was a longer already 1.5 story, which may, as Mr. Evans, I can't recall that far back, being of an original, which gave quite a lot of overlooking to this to that extension which we approved. I was just trying to understand the viewpoint, because that one was quite a lot further down the road, and behind it was a lot of really mature trees, which again, from a rear perspective, you couldn't actually see into the garden unless you had a pair of binoculars, I think. So, there was a slightly different character setting, if you like, to the earlier one that we overturned. However, for me, I think that if you look at the variety of the rears of those gardens, and that's why I asked for the satellite view, so that I could get an indication of, has there been other types of rear extension? And I mean, we all know that the first extension next door, leaves a lot to be desired, as the dormer windows leave a lot to be desired. But again, I'm a great believer, you don't use one mistake to rectify another. However, if we don't believe this to be a mistake in terms of making these houses livable for today's families, and for me, it's about preserving the integrity of our granite heritage. And if you look, there won't be a view. We appreciate you will see it from the rear. However, I think there's an awful lot worse to concern ourselves along that back. And I think that given if we hadn't already approved the single story, which was in a different type of material, I think we would have had a stronger argument to uphold the officer's recommendation. So, I think there's a mixture of things for us to consider. And also Historic Environment Scotland, some of the character appraisals and considerations they give us, it does kind of fluctuate, because before, when you were putting on some sort of extension to a listed building or whatever, it had to be completely contrasting, and so that kind of goes in a bit of a rotation of what view is in and what's out. I think what we have to say, in my view, is, would it have an unwelcome detriment in that area? And I think because of what already exists in that area, I don't think it will, and I think it will ensure the longevity of our granite heritage. And I think it sends out a signal that we want people to maintain these buildings and to live in them and to make them suitable for today's living. Your question was quite clear, Councillor Cameron, around understanding the weight of the proposed plan, and it has been in situ now for 9 months, and we do have a strategic development plan that supports the proposed plan that was signed off by Scottish ministers in August. So, again, Mr. Evans was right in some of his, in all of his consideration. So, that it's checks and balances. But on balance, I would be supporting both of yourselves, Councillor Bell and Councillor Cameron, that we would overturn the officer's recommendation. And I'd ask Mr. Evans if he could give us some guidance in terms of conditions that may be applied, which is quite normal in terms of when we remove this, particularly given it is in a conservation area. I'm sure he'll give cognizance to the fact that it's already got a single story application approved. So he'll obviously know the considerations that were applied to that. Mr. Evans, could you perhaps help us out here?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think the only condition that had occurred to me as potentially being relevant would just be to secure full details of the finishes and materials prior to work starting. The appointed officer's report noted that there was a lack of detail in terms of the fascias, for example, so we can perhaps just get some clarification of that before works are underway.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, Mr. Evans, if you could. forward a appropriate condition on that basis.
Sure.
Ms. McBain, I always like to get an audio record for the decision. So could you just ask us to through the agree?
No problem. So just for the recording, can you just intimate that you're happy to approve the application with the one condition as stated by Mr. Evans? So Councillor Bolton?
I agree.
Councillor Bell?
I agree.
And Councillor Cameron?
Yes, I agree as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So the application will be approved with the one condition.
Okay, so we've the body's agreed to overturn the decision of the appointed officer. Thank you, folks, for that one. Oops. Just moving on. That we finished. That's us. For some reason, of course, we had 2 on it, and I kept thinking I had 2, but I only had 2.
No idea what you did to me there, convener.
Give me a break, Murray. I've done both of them.
I know. Thankfully, I was dipping out and in of that one with dogs barking, and then I heard something about children. So
Yeah, I didn't dip in and out. It was just the dog was barking quite a lot.
yeah, I thought it was for effect with the application.
No,
that
no,
dealing
not
with.
at all. Not at all.
I'll just
well,
stop the recording now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Switch off.